This is the Cadillac Cien, a prize car obtained from Umbria Rally Easy, a 1v1 tarmac race in the Special Conditions event hall. This event is accessible once you obtain the A license, the second license in the game. This car shares a lot in common with the RSC Rally Raid car, which I talked about in my previous video. Both are obtained from easy events unlocked very early in a playthrough by getting the B and A licenses immediately. However, there are some key differences. Unlike the RSC with its progression breaking value of over 265k credits, the Cien doesn't have a sell price. That's okay though, because this is a car that you'll almost definitely want to keep. The first thing you'll notice after obtaining the car is its insane peak power. 760 horsepower stock, 798 after an oil change, with the options of going to 987 with a supercharger, or 1023 with the highest stage of NA tuning. It weighs 1,450 kg stock, but has 3 stages of weight reduction available, which bring it down to 1,232 kg, a respectable weight for a mid-engine car bearing a V12 engine. It also has a 49-51 weight distribution, which is ideal as it gives the car great maneuverability and rear traction, without it feeling overly unstable. It comes with semi-racing suspension and a fully customizable transmission out of the box, allowing you to make handling and gear adjustments as soon as you obtain it. The most impressive thing about the Cien, however, is its downforce stats. In its stock form, it has a maximum of 25 front downforce and 35 rear. For comparison, the RSC Rally Raid, along with almost every other rally car in the game, has 13 front downforce and 18 rear. What makes it even more insane is the fact that it can equip a rear wing. The wing increases the max front and rear downforce by 30 each side, meaning the Cien can have 55 front downforce and 65 rear. With the wing, it now has more downforce than the majority of race cars, including the CLK LM, Viper GTSR, and the cover car Ford GT LM, which all only get 38 front and 53 rear each. Of course, the Cien isn't without its downsides, and some of them will be immediately noticeable once you begin driving. It's notoriously sluggish between gears due to how GT4 handles gear shifts. To shift from one gear to the next, the game engages the clutch, allows the RPM needle to fall, then as soon as the needle drops to where it should be, the clutch is disengaged and the car can begin to accelerate again. Every car in the game has a unique engine brake stat, and the game uses this to determine the fall rate of the RPM needle between gears. From looking at the game's internal car database, known as SpecDB, we can see the Cien's engine brake stat is 150, which is slightly above average for a road car, but falls behind most race cars, which generally have 200 or more. Typically you can increase the car's engine brake value with clutch or flywheel upgrades, but neither are available for the Cien. What really exacerbates the issue is its high revving engine with a 9k RPM redline. This means the Cien has to drop way more revs from gear to gear than most cars in the game, and it doesn't have a higher engine brake stat to compensate for this. This is the exact same issue that the Porsche 905 suffers from, which is also infamous for having slow gear shifts, except the 905 is even more extreme, as it has a 12k RPM redline and an engine brake stat of 122. The issue is most noticeable when switching from first to second. However, this is more the fault of something else, the stock gear setup. To put it simply, first and second gear are both way too short. The car isn't able to put its power onto the road, causing traction control to work overtime to prevent wheel spin on launch. A quick way to fix this is to use manual transmission and avoid using first gear when launching or exiting corners, preventing wheel spin and unnecessary tyre wear while also circumventing the slow gear shift. We'll look at how to solve this issue properly with gear setup later. Besides the gear shift issue, the Cien's downsides are relatively minor. While 1,232 kg isn't overly heavy, it's not light either, which means it can struggle with tyre wear if you don't consider which tyres to use based on the track and lap count. While this won't be an issue for most events, this is the main thing holding it back from being a clear-cut viable option for Gran Turismo World Championship, as most races are decided by pit strategy, and the Cien will be forced to pit in every race, even with racing hards. Tyre wear is also based on the car's tyre dimensions, and the Cien's front tyres are considerably narrower than the rear, with 245 width in the front and 335 width in the rear. Despite being a high-powered rear-heavy car, its front tyres will often be the first to begin wearing, which means you'll be dealing with understeer before you're forced to pit. The Cien is generally outclassed by the JGTC GT500s, which can get very similar max downforce values of 50 front and 70 rear, are lighter, have much wider tyres, and can get turbo upgrades which can match the Cien's power output. The fact that JGTCs have the option of running less power is also a benefit. Because the Cien has such high torque output, the rear wheels are always going to be overworked, plus the car needs to brake more often to slow down before corners. This means that both the front and rear wheels are going to wear faster, while a JGTC with stock power can avoid such issues. Thankfully, it's possible to use the Cien to obtain the best JGTC car in the game, which we'll look at later. Many events where the Cien would thrive are limited to production cars only, most notably Stars and Stripes and Supercar Festival. The latter is a particularly ironic scenario, as the AI will use the Cien against you, and it's a particularly strong opponent due to all of the reasons I just explained. This production car restriction doesn't apply to the rest of the beginner and professional events, however, meaning the Cien is allowed to run rampant in MR, Clubman, Cup, and NA. You need to consider that this is a car you can obtain within your first hour of playing GT mode. A car with 800 horsepower and downforce that eclipses most race cars that you would typically have to beat multiple difficult events to obtain deep into a playthrough. The Cien's potential is insane for how early it can be obtained. The goal of this video is to showcase its potential and also how to make it more fun to drive. Whether you're using it to Goliath your way through the beginner events, or you're pushing it to its limit against race cars, this video will go through everything you need to know. To start, let's talk about obtaining the Cien in the first place. If you want to get it as soon as possible, you should get the B&A licenses as soon as you begin GT mode. This was the primary topic of my previous video, where I discussed the various ways of obtaining the licenses in the fastest manner. To recap, if you're playing on the American NTSCU release of Gran Turismo 4 and have a GT3 save file with B&A licenses completed, you can import them alongside up to 100k credits. Even if you only import the starting 18k credits, this is enough to buy a really strong first car, like the Chevrolet Camaro SS and some upgrades. This can breeze through the Tarmac Special Condition events, including Umbria Rally Easy for the Cien and Capri Rally Easy for the RC Rally Raid. On all other releases of GT4, you need a GT4 Prologue save instead to import the B&A licenses. If you don't have any way to import, or you just want to do the licenses casually, here is my recommended route. Assuming you immediately begin earning the B&A licenses on day 1, by the time you're finished, enough days will have passed for the 1995 Subaru Impreza version 2 to appear in the early 90s used dealership for under 10k credits. This is one of the strongest cars that can appear for this price, as it has 267 horsepower after an oil change. I recommend selling the loophole that you obtain from the B license bronzes to afford some extra upgrades, like a rear wing, weight reduction, and a racing flywheel. Remember to go into the car settings before racing, to max out the downforce on both sides, and disable both stability management and traction control in the driving aids menu. For those unaware, ASM understeer and oversteer both slow down the car as it turns, crippling the car's cornering performance. To have full control over the car's handling, be sure to set both to 0. As the Impreza is a low-powered 4-wheel drive, it also doesn't need traction control, as it has barely any wheel spin even in first gear. It'll breeze through Umbria Rally, as the AI opponent typically doesn't put up much of a fight. The Impreza's stock suspension is quite floaty, however, and you need to be conscious of braking while turning at high speeds. The reverse layout is a bit more challenging, as there are no overtake opportunities in the initial downhill section. You can usually squeeze past the AI following the hairpin, and holding onto the lead afterwards should be trivial. After less than 10 minutes of racing, the Cien is yours. You do need to consider that obtaining it so early is a massive progression skip, so you may want to consider letting it sit in the garage until you feel you absolutely need to use it. While crushing the AI's hopes and dreams is an enjoyable experience in its own way, you also miss out on a different kind of experience by not using an underpowered car instead and beating the odds. It's up to you to decide what you seek from your GT4 playthrough. Once you're prepared to see what it's capable of though, it's time to get to work. A big disclaimer before we continue, all of my settings are specifically for the American NTSCU release of Gran Turismo 4. This is important because the PAL version runs at 50 frames per second and has some noticeable physics differences. In general, cars feel lighter and more flimsy, as the game is performing 10 less physics calculations per second compared to NTSCU running at 60 FPS. This especially causes issues with racing tires, as high downforce cars tend to wear their tires way faster on PAL. While the PAL Cien is fundamentally the same car, your experience may vary from what I showcase in this video. If you have yet to start your GT4 playthrough and have the choice of PAL or NTSCU, I recommend NTSCU as it has more stable physics overall. To tune the car towards an ideal state, you're going to need at least 16k credits. You'll get 10k credits from beating Umbria Rally Easy, so this means you only need to obtain 6k more credits. If you followed my Impreza route, beating Capri Rally Easy and Okubo Wet Easy is an easy way to obtain more credits alongside 2 useful prize cars. the RSC Rally Raid with its insane sell price, and the RX-8 concept, which is eligible for the RX-8 Cup in the Mazda dealership. Once you've the credits saved up, start by buying an oil change in the rear wing. I suggest buying the first 2 stages of weight reduction. The third is optional. The car handles just fine with 2 stages, but the third will reduce tyre wear and make the car perform slightly better overall. Soft sports tyres are a must. The stock medium tyres simply aren't enough. That's all of the things that we actually need. You may have noticed that I didn't suggest buying the supercharger or NA tuning. This is because the car already has more than enough power, and adding more would just make it more difficult to handle, especially with sports tyres. You can optionally buy nitrous however, as this can be deployed on demand and will give the car a nice boost on long straights. I recommend leaving it at the stock power of 30, as increasing it will only make the car more prone to wheel spin. We also didn't buy the racing suspension. The Cien is very unique in that you can make a solid argument that its stock suspension kit is actually better than the fully custom kit. This is because of the spring rate adjustment ranges. With the stock kit, you can lower both sides to 4.0, encouraging weight transfer, making the car easier to turn and drive on bumpy roads. With the fully custom kit, however, the minimum ranges are much higher at 9.4. This is extremely stiff and will cause issues on many tracks as the car will react violently to elevation changes. To add to the Cien's oddities, it has a custom limited slip differential upgrade. This is despite the fact that its stock LSD is already customizable and is identical in function to custom LSD. This means that buying it is completely pointless and a waste of credits. The brake balance controller is optional. The car is actually more beginner friendly to drive without it. Equipping the controller will make the car turn more freely under braking, and I recommend buying it if you have good braking discipline. I personally like how it drives when set to 9 front and 5 rear with sports tyres. If you're playing on PAL, I heavily suggest avoiding the brake balance controller, as equipping it makes the car more likely to snap oversteer. As always, the rigidity increase does not do what it says, and will make the car's handling more floaty at high speeds, so avoid it at all costs. With all of the upgrades bought, it's now time to head into the car settings and make adjustments, beginning with a very crucial step, disabling stability management. As mentioned earlier, ASM only serves to make a car much slower around corners, and disabling it gives us much more control over the car's handling. As for TCS, I recommend setting it to 1. Even with setup, the Cien will be very prone to wheel spin, especially on bumpy tracks. If you have excellent throttle control, and you accept the challenge of managing the Cien's wheel spin, set it to 0, but otherwise, TCS 1 will make the car much easier to drive. Next up, the suspension. With sports tyres, I recommend softening the spring rates to 4.2 front and 4.4 rear. This will allow the Cien to move its weight more freely, allowing it to overcome the understeer it would normally experience with sports tyres. I also suggest lowering the height to 106 front and 101 rear. Lowering the height on both sides will give the car a more responsive turning feel, while raising the front slightly will make the car easier to rotate off throttle. The shocks can be softened to both sides, as this will provide more neutral handling characteristics, while also making the car less likely to overreact to bumps. Finally, for camber angle, raise the front to 1.4 and the rear to 1.6. Camber can transform how the car feels while cornering, and this slight rear bias will emphasize rear grip, making the car feel more stable entering corners without creating understeer. For downforce, both the front and rear can be maxed out to 55 front and 65 rear, to greatly improve cornering grip and braking distances. Finally, there's the LSD. Our goal with the LSD is to make the rear of the car more stable, but not too much or the car will become difficult to rotate. The Cien is a slightly rear-heavy car, and a well-tuned LSD can greatly improve drivability without ruining the car's turning ability. The initial torque improves general stability, and setting it to 25 felt good to me with our suspension setup. Acceleration can be lowered slightly to 35 to make the car easier to turn while throttling out of corners, but not to the point where it feels slippery. Deceleration can then be raised to 35 to increase stability as the throttle is lifted entering corners. Because the Cien already has a desirable weight distribution of 49:51, I did not feel that a ballast was needed. Finally, we have the most important step, gear setup. I'm going to show 2 different ways to set up the Cien's gears, with both having their advantages and disadvantages. The first is the gear trick, which I've previously made an entire video about. If you haven't watched it yet, I highly recommend doing so, to understand the importance of a good gear setup. Start by setting the final drive slider all the way right to 5. Then, move the auto slider to 1. Next, move the final drive slider back to the left. I recommend setting it to 3.3 as an all-around setting, for a good balance of top speed and acceleration without excessive wheel spin. Now, we're going to arrange the individual gear sliders in the super close pattern. This makes both first and second gear as long as the sliders will allow. to greatly reduce the RPM drop size between gears from 3rd onwards. Set the individual ratios as shown on screen to apply the pattern. Don't touch the auto slider after this, as it will reset the gears and you'll need to start over. With sports tyres, first gear is still going to be way too short, so I heavily recommend using manual transmission and launching the car in 2nd gear. The same applies to cornering. Try to keep the car in 2nd gear to prevent rear tyre wear in the slow gear shift. If you're driving an automatic, you can hold the up shift button while the car is in 2nd, and it will hold the current gear, preventing the downshift to 1st. With a final of 3.3, the Cien can reach a top speed of 212 miles per hour, which it will just barely reach by the end of Fuji's home straight. The 2nd gear setup is something I've never actually shown in any of my videos before. Some time ago, a glitch was discovered that allows the user to create normally impossible gear ratio combinations. By adjusting the final drive, moving the auto slider, then exiting out of the gear setup screen, the gears will revert, but the game still stores the final drive you used before you moved the auto slider. When you re-enter the gear setup screen and adjust individual ratios, the game gets confused and thinks that the final drive is the stored one instead of what it's currently set to. This creates wacky scenarios, like a 4th gear that's shorter than 3rd gear. This is way more than just a neat gimmick, however. This gives full freedom to create extremely close gear ratios, and also lets us circumvent the issue with the first setup where first gear was too short. This glitch was brought to my attention last year by GT4 speedrunning community member Lizzie, and it currently doesn't have an official name. In this video, I'll refer to it as the gear-free transform glitch, as suggested by community member Azulia. If you have any better name ideas, let me know in the comments below. To perform it, follow this procedure exactly. Set the final drive to 5, then set auto to 1, then set first gear to 3.413 and 2nd to 2.880. Press OK, now re-enter the gear setup screen. We want to store our final drive of 3.8, so move the slider there, set auto to 2, then press cancel. Re-enter, set 3rd gear to 2.460, 4th gear to 2.125, then press OK and re-enter. We now want to store our final drive of 3.3, so move the final drive slider, set auto to 2, cancel, then re-enter. Set 5th gear to 1.850 and 6th gear to 1.620, then press OK. All of the individual gear ratios have now been stored, so you're free to re-enter and move around the final drive slider to stretch out the gears as desired. If you set the final drive to 2.350, first gear will be as long as 2nd gear was in the first setup, while also having the exact same top speed. Because we were able to make first gear usable without wheel spin, it means that we're able to utilize the entire gearbox, meaning the car can have smaller RPM drops without sacrificing top speed. This results in lightning fast gear shifts, and the Cien's Achilles heel is no longer noticeable. That being said, the gear-free transform setup actually doesn't improve acceleration as much as you'd think compared to the gear trick. It's not even a tenth faster in the 1000-meter sprint compared to the first setup with a 2nd gear launch. This is because the Cien has a flat torque peak at high RPMs, and the first setup already does a good job of staying within peak RPMs. It does enhance how the car feels to drive though, in my opinion. It's also way easier for automatic transmission users, as you no longer have to worry about slow launches or having to hold 2nd gear around corners. For manual transmission users, eliminating the unusable first gear does have a side effect that can affect how well the car handles. Engine braking, on top of affecting how quickly the car drops RPMs, also affects how quickly the car decelerates. Because the Cien has a rather low engine brake value, it carries a lot of speed through corners, which can result in a wide turn radius. Shorter gears will result in faster engine braking, so gearing down entering corners will result in the car being able to lose speed more easily mid-corner. With the gear trick setup, there's a technique you can apply to avail of this engine braking for a brief period. By rapidly gearing down the first on corner entry, then gearing back up the second mid-corner. This helps the car rotate more easily when it's done correctly. It takes some practice, however, as it's very costly if you're between gears when you're supposed to be accelerating out of the corner. Gearing down too suddenly can also cause unpredictable handling, so try to pace your downshift so the car isn't bouncing off the rev limiter. With the gear-free transform setup, this technique is unavailable, as first gear has the same engine braking speed as 2nd gear did in the gear trick setup. You'll need to consider which setup better suits your driving style. If you've installed nitrous, I recommend using it only when the car is out of launch gear. Using it as the car is launching will cause wheel spin, and it will mostly go to waste as the car won't be able to apply its power to the road. However, if you're exiting a hairpin at low RPMs, you can deploy it to push the car back into peak RPMs again. I suggest letting go at nitrous if you notice that TCS is preventing wheel spin. Now that the car is tuned up, I recommend taking it for a test drive at a track that you're familiar with. For a car of this power, I recommend a track with wide roads and plenty of elevation changes, like Fuji 90s or Apricot Hill to get a feel for how it drives. If you haven't unlocked Apricot Hill for free runs yet, the first race at Clubman Cup is also a good testing ground. The suspension and LSD settings are tuned to my own preferences and should serve as a decent foundation. Since everyone has their own driving style, you may want to go back and make further adjustments. For me personally, when I drive the Cien, I tend to brake in a straight line before the corner, let go of the throttle mid-corner to allow the car to rotate, then floor it out once I see a straight line exit. Because the Cien is a mid-engine car, you need to be mindful of how you brake into corners, especially with a soft suspension setup. If you try to brake while turning, not only will it hamper the car's braking effectiveness, it also adds a risk of snap oversteer, especially at high speeds. This is why I recommended Apricot Hill to test the car's handling, as you're entering turn 1 with a lot of speed, and braking too late can cause the car to spin out. If you find that the car is too unstable for your liking, you can lower the front height to 101 and raise LSD deceleration to 45 or higher. This will make the car understeer more off throttle, but overall it will be less at risk of snap oversteer. It goes without saying that, with this setup, the Cien will completely destroy almost any event it can enter. MR, Clubman Cup and NA will all be completely trivial, as the AI drives cars with half as much power as the Cien, with little to no downforce or handling upgrades. This will greatly help you push towards any percent completion, as all beginner and professional events need to be beaten for Gran Turismo World Championship to be unlocked. The Cien can also enter hot rod competition in the American events. You'll probably notice that the main thing holding the Cien back is tyre grip. Sports softs really limit its potential, but thankfully there's plenty of events that allow racing tyres where it can truly shine. The most important of these is Tuning Car Grand Prix, where the AI themselves drive racing mediums. So, once you're ready to move on, I recommend buying some racing mediums to take the Cien to the next level. Now is also a good time to pick up Weight Reduction Stage 3, Nitrous, and the Brake Balance Controller if you haven't already. Because racing tyres are much grippier than sports tyres, some suspension adjustments are required, or the Cien will be even more prone to snap oversteer than before. I suggest stiffening the springs to 5.2 front and 5.4 rear, lowering the front height to 101, increasing the front camber to 1.6, and the rear camber to 2.0. For the brake balance, I suggest a setting of 9 to 4.
9 to 4 is an iconic price.
These settings strike a balance of making the car easy to rotate, while also ensuring it's stable enough when driven correctly. If you find that the car is too unstable, you can increase the front camber in increments of 0.2 to increase braking stability. You can also try lowering the front downforce so the car is more inclined towards rear grip. Doing this will negatively affect the car's braking distances and overall cornering performance, so consider whether the benefits outweigh the costs. Since the Cien's traction is now much improved, it will have a much cleaner launch. This means it's now possible to use nitrous when launching without being affected by wheel spin. The Cien truly comes to life with racing mediums. It can hold much tighter lines around corners, and it's finally able to apply all of its power without understeering. On technical tracks like Tsukuba and Laguna Seca, where top speed isn't important, you can raise the final drive by 0.3 to get better acceleration out of hairpins. Remember to set it back for tracks where top speed is important, however, or you'll be bouncing off the rev limiter. The racing medium should last long enough in most events without wearing. In special condition events, there's no tyre wear at all, making the Cien a solid choice for the tarmac events there. However, it's slightly disadvantaged due to its size, and you'll likely find yourself picking up many accidental penalties by bumping into walls. Something more compact with less power may be easier to drive around these tight circuits. For example, the Opera S2000. This is another extremely strong car that you'll likely be able to pick up with all of the credits you'll be earning with the Cien. Fellow retro GT YouTuber Yellowbird made an entire video about it, which I'll link in the description. The Cien can also enter All American Championship with racing tyres. This is an interesting event, as there's a large disparity in performance between the worst and best cars. In this event, the Cien can finally meet an AI opponent that matches it in performance, the Chaparral 2J. The 2J particularly excels on city tracks like Seattle and New York, and it will constantly be on your tail. It falls behind on the racetracks, however. This is a fun event in my opinion, and the Cien is a nice option to enter with, as the races are just short enough that it can run racing mediums without any issues. There's one more event of interest that the Cien can enter, All Japan GT Championship. This event is open to cars of all types. You don't have to bring something Japanese, despite it being at the Japanese event hall. The Cien is more than powerful enough to enter. However, these races are quite long, and tyre wear may become a concern in the later laps. If you want to use the Cien here, you can still use racing mediums, but you'll need to handle the wear as it comes. This especially becomes problematic after 10 laps in Suzuka East. In long races, however, you can pull such a big lead that you can afford to make a pit stop if you really want to. The prize for beating All Japan GT Championship is the Moto Pitwork Z, the best JGGC in the game with superior weight distribution, tire, and grip stats. This is a worthy successor to the Cien if you're ready to move on. Once you unlock endurance events, the Cien is outclassed by the Z, as with stock power and some setup adjustments, the Z drives surprisingly well with sports mediums, making it a fantastic choice for El Capitan 200 miles. This awards the Minolta Toyota 88CV, one of the best options for Gran Turismo World Championship. The Cien's journey most likely ends here in a casual playthrough, but what a journey it's been. What began by throwing around the used Impreza through Italian streets, ended in Japan's finest race cars being beaten by new age American muscle. Hopefully this video gives you the confidence to push the Cien to its limits, as it's a very fun car once you tune it to your preferences and learn how it drives. So, can the Cien beat Gran Turismo World Championship? I definitely believe it can, but you're likely going to be relying on the AI balancing the points between them in each race. Perhaps someone else can pick up where I left off and show what the Cien is truly capable of. For those of you who made it this far, thank you for sticking along. I would like to propose a question. What sort of content would you like to see from this channel in the future? I have plenty of ideas for future content, including breaking down how to get top times in every lesson in Gran Turismo 4 Prologue, or doing more deep dives into cars like the Cien and why their hidden stats make them so strong in races. Please let me know down below, because I do want to try and upload to this channel more regularly. Thanks again, and see you soon.